Salute, Booktube. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for being here. It's the first week of May already, and I have yet to make my reading wrap up, my April 2026 reading wrap up video. So here it is. I wanted to do this a few days earlier, but I got caught up with some stuff. And then also, for those of you who are new to this channel, I am based in the United Arab Emirates, a country in the Middle East that's very much in the crossfires of the Trump-Netanyahu war on Iran. The ceasefire that was done a couple of weeks ago, maybe now, has, for the most part, it's held. However, just a couple of days ago, there was a barrage of missile attacks from Iran into the United Arab Emirates. Most of them intercepted, but not a good sign, not a good sign. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is it's been about 48, 72 hours since those attacks, and so far there hasn't been any more attacks. But who knows? Who knows? And with this Trump administration and their press conferences where all Donald Trump says is, yes, we're winning, we've got it under, we're winning, don't worry, and we have no details. We have no details. And the mistake that us here in the United Arab Emirates did is we've allied ourselves with the United States, allied ourselves with them. And we have no say in any of the negotiations. I mean, this last barrage of attacks, it came out of nowhere, and there must have been some issue in the negotiations. But we're not a party as a country to the negotiations. Our foreign policy is pretty much dictated on America's, and Iran cannot reach the United States with their missiles. So if they have to attack somebody, they attack the closest U.S. ally in the region, and that's us. And not a good position to be in. Not a good position. Anyway, we don't want to get into that. We want to talk about the books that I read in April 2026. I read a whole bunch of books, and we can get started. The only question is where do we get started? I believe the best place to start, I think, is with the buddy reads I did. April, there was a Booktube reading event called People April, and for People April, you are encouraged to read biographies, memoirs, autobiographies, letters, that kind of stuff. And I read two of them, and I read two of them in conjunction in a buddy read with my good friend JJ, the bookworm blacksmith, and with Doug, a very a regular commenter and friend on this channel. He's all over the comment section on almost every video, so thank you, Doug. I heard, Doug, the sad news, the tragic news of your mother's passing. I do apologize. I mean, my sincerest condolences to you on that terrible news. If there's anything I can do, all I can really do is maybe take your mind off with these videos. I hope you're coping well. I'll link. JJ already discussed. She made a video discussing our buddy read. I'll tag the video. I'll link the video below in the description below. The two books we read were two biographies. The first one is this one, Queen Noor. The book is called Leap of Faith, and it's by Queen Noor. The subtitle is Memoirs of an Unexpected Life. There's Queen Noor, and there she is with her hubby, the late King of Jordan. Noor, born Lisa Halabi, was an Arab American lady who married the King of Jordan, a Middle Eastern kingdom roughly between Palestine and Iraq, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. And there is King Hussein, her husband. And I had mentioned this in my TBR video earlier, that I'm not the biggest fan of the Hashemite kingdom and the monarchy in Jordan, and nothing in this book has convinced me otherwise. Quite the opposite. My loathing of them has just increased after reading this memoir. I mean, everything. Jordan is a fake construct. It was invented by the British after World War I. And then cemented after World War II as a independent Middle Eastern country where none had ever existed previously. The British created a kingdom. They placed a king. They brought a king from outside and placed him on the throne. Hussein's father, who was assassinated. Hussein would take over in the 1950s as a young man, boy, really. I think he was 17 or 18 when he ascended the throne, and he passed away in his 60s in 1999 or the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken. And that's where everything is fake, even this fake cover. I mean, this cover, it's supposed to be, that's the beautiful Wadi Rum and the beautiful deserts of Jordan, and then this picture, was supposed to be some kind of spontaneous photo that they took. Nothing could be nothing could be closer to the truth. This is photoshopped, and there's a lot of editing, and there was a photo shoot. Anyway, everything else is fake or disingenuous. I'm beginning to notice that I'm better at. It's hard for me in words now, without notes, just out of the top of my head, to explain, to kind of, or to attempt to review this book, or to explain it. I'm probably much better with words, and that's what I did. For those of you who are eagle-eyed on my channel and who check my the description below, on most of my videos I try to remember to keep my email, and you can email me about anything. And I also try to link my Substack. I started the Substack where I just write random things. I haven't written much. There's 2 articles, but then after reading this book, and I was emailing back and forth with JJ and Doug, I decided to collect and all those writings and emails, edit it, and it became now my 3rd Substack article. So you can check it on Substack. I was hoping, rather than trying to explain, because there's a lot here, and I don't want this video to go on and on. This is a complex subject in a complex region, and Jordan is a complex country. What I thought I'd do, excuse the glare, I just opened my laptop. I'm going to read from the Substack article that I wrote, and I'll read just the first couple of paragraphs, and if you enjoy it, you can click the link to the Substack. It's completely free. There's no subscription. You can read the rest of the article, but shall I just go ahead, or shall I give some background? Let me just go, and you guys tell me what you think in the comments, or on the comments of the Substack article. So I titled it "From Princess of Santa Monica to Queen of Jordan." Not really a review, just observations from reading the book. It starts, "I was mistaken when, in my announcement video on my Booktube channel, see link in the bio, I called Lisa Halaby, later Queen Noor, a typical suburban American kid. It's very clear from the first few pages recounting her childhood and adolescence, and despite all her attempts to portray the contrary, that Noor was very much a child of great privilege. This is reflected in her family history, her father's career, both in the private and public sector, and the places Noor lived and went to school. Noor's immigrant grandfather came from Syria to America, establishing himself as a leading founder of what would become the Neiman Marcus franchise of upscale department stores. Her father's public sector duties, despite, quote, worrying about money, were high-level federal government appointments handled by the president himself. Noor's father is on a first-name basis with JFK, LBJ, and she even recounts a personal episode between herself and Lady Bird Johnson. Later in the private sector, Noor's father eventually rises to become president and CEO of Pan Am Airlines. We are given a description of Noor's educational career: elitist private schools in New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., New York again, before settling at a prestigious boarding school in Concord, Massachusetts. Her secondary education eventually culminates in her first big adult decision. She is, quote, torn between attending Stanford or Princeton, a dilemma 99% of Americans would never likely have. Clearly, Noor is from a privileged coastal elite due to her father's exalted position in one of the nation's biggest airlines. Noor, quote, discovers the pleasure of flying, although this supposed early pleasure is mentioned early in the book to foreshadow her future royal husband's love of flying. During those years, she says, my father took me with him on work visits to small-town airports around the country in a small plane, end quote. There is no mention of where in flyover country these, quote, small-town airports are. Instead, we hear of trips to Europe, French lessons in France, Greek lessons in Greece, and other parts of Europe. Quote, skiing was more economical for us in Austria or Switzerland, she says. It's in one of those trips to the exotic kingdom of Jordan that Noor eventually meets King Hussein. Foreign holidays, let alone holidays hobnobbing with royalty, is not on the cards for the regular American working at Walmart or flipping burgers at Burger King. I think I'll leave it there, but you get the idea. I'm not the biggest fan of the Jordanian royal family. That's the beginning of the article that's on my Substack, and it's basically setting the stage. She comes from extreme privilege, and that privilege gives her the access to royalty, like King Hussein. She catches King Hussein's eye because she's a tall, half Arab, half Swedish California girl, and yeah, it just goes on and on. So I could have come and like just explained on the video here, but if you really want to get my thoughts, please do check out my Substack and tell me what you think there. The second book, I did two buddy reads with JJ and with Doug. The second one is also part of People April. It's a memoir, a diary, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. This was a very sad, very sad story, a very tragic story. It's not a spoiler. I think everybody knows. I think this is very big in North American schools, taught in North American schools. It's not a spoiler that Anne Frank, doesn't end happily ever after. It's the story of a girl, a Jewish girl, German Jewish girl who flees to Holland, and her and her family are forced to hide in an attic of a warehouse in Amsterdam, hiding from the Nazis. And when she goes into hiding, a 13-year-old child, small girl, adolescent, and her and her family are trapped for 2 years almost in this hiding place. And again, I don't think it's a spoiler when I say that Anne Frank doesn't survive. Her and her family, their hiding place is discovered. They are apprehended. They are sent to the concentration camps. She's hiding in the attic with her two parents, her older sister, and then a couple from another family with their own teenage son, a bit older than Anne Frank. Those are the six, and then later she is joined by a seventh member who is a dentist, family friend who's a dentist, older man in his 40s or 50s. Of course, there are the Dutch, non-Jewish Dutch people who are supporting them and helping them in this terrible ordeal. And it's just because you know the ending, and reading every page, you know how it's going to end. It just makes it more and more tragic. But it's just, no child should go through this. I had mentioned during our buddy read and our correspondence that this book has probably touched a nerve with a whole new generation of readers. A lot of the kids, or they're probably adults now, they were probably teenagers at the time, a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, the COVID pandemic, where everybody was in lockdown and we were trapped in our houses. Very similar, but of course, in Anne's case, a much longer case, and she never went outside. She never went outside for 2 whole years. 2 whole years, can you imagine? Now, she was there from the age of 13 to 15. So on top of that, I mean, if you're an adult, maybe, although the adults as well, they don't fare any better than teenage Anne Frank or her sister or the other teenage boy in the house with them. But as a teenager, and she goes through, puberty and just the whole rage of emotions, and people who have teenage kids or who are teenagers themselves know the kind of rebellious nature of teenagers. Now imagine you're a rebellious teenager, but you're stuck between 4 walls pretty much with adults. She's not very close with her sister. They're not too much alike. There's a lot of rivalry, which I guess is normal, sibling rivalry. And then there's the boy Peter, who's the son of the 2 friends. at the beginning, which she's 13, she doesn't have, feelings. But when, you're 14, 15, the whole, teenage hormonal thing, she has one option, and that's Peter, who has his own separate room. But, it's very obvious that she has nothing in common with him, that she doesn't even like him. He's quite a boring young man, young boy, really boy. He's like 16 or 17. Not very interesting, has very little in common with Anne Frank, but he's pretty much pedestalized. He's got Anne and her sister vying for his attention because he's the only other person of the other sex in the house, hiding with them. So just a sad, sad story, of course. But Anne, the way she writes as well, it's just what could have been. It just shows you the brutality of the Nazi, the Nazi rounding up of the Jews in the Holocaust. They didn't spare children or teenagers, and that was really how many of them were there. And you can see the potential, just the potential. Like a kid, with their whole lives ahead of them, just brutally cut short. And I like, because she mentions her favorite subject is history. For those of you who are new, that's my favorite subject. You could see what Anne would become if she was allowed to just live a normal life, just a normal life. No child, no teenager, nobody under the age of 18 should face what she faced. But so it's a very powerful, very well-known book. I'm sure most people have heard it, but I really enjoyed the buddy read with JJ and with Doug. Doug doesn't have a channel; he's just a commenter. But JJ has a channel, and she posted her thoughts on a video discussing these two books, the Queen Noor book and the Anne Frank book. So I'll link to that channel, to that video, and you guys should check it out. You should check it out. Where do we go next? The second event I'm taking part in is a year-long event, and that's Historathon 2026. Historathon is a reading event, a year-long reading event where you're encouraged to read books about history throughout the year. And the year is divided into 4 quarters. The first quarter was mostly antiquity, the beginning of time to the year 500 CE or AD 500. Quarter 2 is the year 500 to the year 1500, which approximates the Middle Ages, or what the Europeans call the medieval ages, what people in the Middle East call the Golden Age. But for that, I had decided to stick to reading books about the Crusades. My initial plan was to read this book, Thomas Asbridge's The Crusades. It's a big, big book. But just my reading, I just couldn't. I wanted to really get stuck into this and, like clear my head and focus on this. But I couldn't because of all the other readings I had. So I didn't end up reading this as a. Don't judge me for this, but as a sort of like a replacement, just to give me a very, very broad overview and just remind myself of the events of the Crusades, what led to them, and the different, because there wasn't one crusade. There's 4. I mean, some historians count 5, 6, 7, 8 crusades, but there were 4 main ones in the Middle East where the Christian Europeans came to invade, or in their words, reconquer Jerusalem and the Holy Land from the Muslims that were in charge at the time, or had been in charge for the past 300-400 years until the Crusades came. So I found this book at the used bookstore, and it was, don't judge me, but it's the Idiot's Guide to the Crusades, the Complete Idiot's Guide. Very simple, almost written for high school, but again, very, very gives you a nice high level look at the Crusades. So I read this instead of the big Asbridge Crusades book, but I'll read this. I'm hoping to read this in May. There's my May and June is a bit. It's going to be a bit broken up. I'll discuss it in my May TBR video, which I hope to. I'll probably film after this and post a couple of days after this. So for the Crusades, I only read The Idiot's Guide. Again, focusing on other books. Some of those other books was the other reading event. This is a self-proclaimed. This I did my own book event, and this book event is reading about America. The year 2026 corresponds with the 250th anniversary of the United States. July 4th, 1776, America, became the United States. And 2026 is going to be 250 years. So for this auspicious event, I decided to focus on my reading America, books about America. I will probably link it with Historathon for quarter three, because quarter three Historathon starts from 1500 to 1820, and then quarter four is 1820 to the present. And a lot of America, when I say America, I mean United States American history. The history of the nation state really begins after 1500 and the Columbian discovery. Um, the other reason is I have a lot of books about America, and I do need to read them and flush out my library. So I'm finding books that I want to read, but I don't necessarily want to keep. And like I said, more of the history books I'll start in quarter three. So starting from July, I'll read more histories. Right now, what I've been reading is a lot more books about American contemporary politics, economics, that kind of thing. One of the books I read was this one. We were talking about Anne Frank. This is another dark, dark book. Even from the cover, you'll see it's by Anand Giridharadas. It's called The True American. Look at that dark, dark cover. The subtitle is Murder and Mercy in Texas. So this book is really a Texas book, but it's also about broader America. This is the story. Those of you who have good memories, after reading, I remember this story. Just a couple of days after 9/11, maybe on September 14th, a crazed gunman, Mark Stroman, a white Texan, sort of, I don't know what the word is, like, not hillbilly, but like a biker kind of guy, biker neo-Nazi kind of guy, goes on a shooting rampage in revenge for September 11th. Anybody with dark skin that doesn't look white American was his target. He ended up killing two people. One was a Muslim Indian, and the other was a Sikh Indian. None of them were Arab. He didn't know the difference between an Arab and an Indian, or a Sikh and a Muslim. So he killed both of them. Then he went to a third gentleman by the name of Raisuddin Bhuyan, they all worked in convenience stores in Texas, like gas stations in Texas, behind the counter. And he shot Rasuddin, shot him, got him in the eye, but he miraculously survived the shooting. And this is that story. Mark Stroman is eventually apprehended, he is convicted, and he is put on death row. And this is this story. With Rasuddin, it's a story about America. It sort of flips the title, The True American. Who is the true American these days? Previously, yes, the stereotypical American, when you think of an American as a white male, most likely, this changes that sort of dynamic. Rasuddin is a Bangladeshi immigrant. He eventually, after getting shot and restarting his life after that catastrophic event, he becomes an American citizen, and then he's always been a driven person, and he has like a kind of spiritual awakening. He's always been spiritual and religious, but he really wants to change America. He wants to see change. He does want to see change. He decides to campaign to try to extradite Mark Stroman's death penalty. He says he's forgiven, and he wants because he was scheduled to be killed by lethal injection, and Rasuddin fights to have that either postponed or to move him to life in prison rather than to be killed by lethal injection, to be executed by the state of Texas. And that's the story, and it goes into the Mark Stroman's family, and and Rasuddin and his family, and the switch. The issue here is that white American, sort of small town Texan, um, I don't know what the word is, like not redneck, not white trash, not hill, like just lower class white America, and a mobile Bangladeshi immigrant, newly immigrant America, and that dichotomy, the change in American society. Um, Rasuddin, the victim, starts to feel sorry for the pathologies and the life and the lifestyle that these poor white Americans lived, um, and um, and the society that they live in. There's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of unwanted pregnancy. There's a lot of crime and theft. No stable jobs, poor education, and yeah, it kind of flips the script. You've got the brown sort of Bangladeshi immigrant, making a success of himself, and the native white American, long time sort of nativist white Americans are struggling. So it's an interesting book about contemporary America, but dark, just dark story. The second book I read for America, 250 America, is this book, Winter in America. The subtitle is A Cultural History of Neoliberalism from the 60s to the Reagan Revolution. And the author is Daniel Robert McClure. This book is a very academic look at, what the subtitle says, America from the 60s to the 80s, pretty much. It's the rise of neoliberalism. Very academic book, but this book makes a very strong case, crouched in race, feminism and race, but race especially. At least for me, it gets a bit jargony, and the sort of very academic kind of feminist jargon, which I had difficulty with the stuff about race. It was a bit easier for me to understand as a non-American. But it's basically the argument that Daniel Robert McClure makes is that America, once upon a time in the 1930s, the 40s, even the 50s and 60s, America was a statist liberal country. It was a welfare, a highly socialist country, for lack of a better term. The 1920s, and before that, there was the great age of, what was the word? The Gilded Age, and then there was a reaction to that, progressivism, that led to the Depression and the New Deal, and the New Deal, Franklin, FDR forward, was a Democratic Party, left-leaning majority that ran America really, really until the 1970s, and then especially the 1980s with the coming of Reagan. Now, what McClure argues here is that he calls it the welfare state. America was he didn't call it the welfare state. He called it the Jim Crow welfare state. So what does the Jim Crow welfare state mean? America was a welfare state. The New Deal had created an American system in which government and the unions and business sort of worked together to ensure that most Americans had a decent wage, that firing people was very difficult, that steady pay increases would be sort of routine. There was a lot of, I guess, like benefits paid as well. Taxes were high, but social spending was high as well. Now that was the welfare state part of it. The Jim Crow part of it is, yes, it was a welfare state, and it lifted a lot of Americans out of the poverty of the Depression and the pre-Depression Gilded Age, but it only lifted the white America, the Black America was still very much under Jim Crow in the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, until the 50s and the 60s, when the civil rights movement started to happen. Now, what happened in the 1950s and 60s? The white beneficiaries of the welfare state, and the welfare state meant the rise of suburbia. You got a home with a picket fence, like a white picket fence, and a family, and a car, and a dog, and you lived in the suburbs, and they built the interstate highway, and they built like Hoover Dam or whatever, and electricity and all that stuff. That was a welfare given to the the white American people. Now, in the 1950s and 60s, the African Americans started to fight um, and demand their civil rights. And when that happened, they were ultimately successful. But when that happened, that Jim Crow welfare state, Jim Crow was abolished, but the welfare state was abolished as well. Just at the time when blacks or African Americans needed the welfare state the most. So, I mean, LBJ and the Great Society tried to help African Americans, but there was a big backlash in the 70s and 80s. McClure argues by mostly in the late 60s and 70s by white America that said, okay, no more welfare state. Why? We were the beneficiaries of welfare state, but now that the blacks have got civil rights, we don't want welfare state anymore, and we get the rise of the free market and capitalism and laissez-faire and Ronald Reagan and the invisible hand, and let's get government out of business. And we've seen it to our day, whether it's Reagan or Bush for one, or even Clinton and the Gingrich, or Bush or Trump. I guess the whole conservative party, sort of whatever the Republican message is. It's been really since the 70s and 80s. So that's what McClure argues here. The biggest irony of this whole thing is these white conservatives who benefited from the New Deal and benefited from what McClure calls Jim Crow welfare state, who got their houses built, who got their kids through college, who got themselves through college with the GI Bill, who got houses and interstate highways and all that good stuff. That's what America, conservative or Republican Americans call the golden, like the golden age of America. The 1950s, the 1960s was the golden age. When Trump says "Make America Great Again," he's referring to making it great like it was in the 1950s and 60s. The irony of all of this is that in the 1950s, that the golden era of the 50s and 60s was a direct result of the New Deal sort of progressive welfare state. But the conservatives nowadays are saying we should go back to the 50s and 60s. Well, what built the 50s and 60s? It was the 1930s and 40s. So, a controversial book, very academic book. Again, this book again. So mostly focusing on the racial aspect, because once the African Americans got their civil rights in the 60s, 70s, started entering the workforce, desegregated schools. White America started to call for an end of welfare and an end of that kind of stuff. So, we see the other phenomenon is when the Jim Crow welfare state allowed white America to move to the suburbs on the outskirts of cities. Who stayed in the inner cities? It was the blacks, So again, it's more of a racial, a bit academic-y. Last month I read this book. Let me just pull it out. This book, Generation of Sociopaths by Bruce Cannon Gibney. The subtitle of this is How the Baby Boomers Betrayed America. This one argues that it was the baby boomers who have destroyed it. This one says this makes a different argument, same period, but because this also, anytime you're talking about post-World War II America, you're really dealing with the baby boomers. So this one takes more of a racial aspect. This one just says that it's the baby boomers that have controlled American policy really from the 1960s to today. So in the 60s, the boomers were young and they wanted tax cuts and they wanted the welfare state and the New Deal and the Great Society. Once the baby boomers started entering the workforce, they started to change their voting habits, and that changed. And they started to elect people like Ronald Reagan and the neoliberal, neoconservative sort of new Republican Party. And we see it. The post-war America, you have the first baby boomer president. They finally put him in, is Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, and he argues, Gibney argues that they're all sociopaths, the baby boomers. Clinton, serial womanizer; Newt Gingrich, serial womanizer; George W. Bush, not a womanizer, but a big chunk of his life as an alcoholic and probably on drugs, probably on hard drugs until he got himself clean. Obama, he gives Obama a bit of a pass. Obama's a bit of a special case. He had a abnormal American upbringing, unique a bit, a lot of foreign. But then you go right back into Hillary Clinton, boomer; Joe Biden, boomer; Donald Trump, boomer; Mitt Romney, boomer. Who else? They're all boomers, and they've at the beginning, they in the 80s, tax cuts. We want tax cuts, and we want less social spending, and we want tax cuts because we're, in the 80s and 90s, the boomers were middle management, and they were executives, and they were pushing up the corporate ladder. And then, well, what do we see now? It continues in the present when we had Obamacare, the whole Obamacare argument. Double ARP, is that what you Americans call it? The healthcare sort of lobby. And it's all the boomers. The boomers, the Obamacare was a boomer public policy because the boomers were entering retirement. It was Obamacare, what Gibney argues, was the baby boomers were fighting for their retirement pensions and their health care. So anyway, so those were the books I read for America at 250 reading event, my own reading event. Anybody who wants to join is more than welcome to. There was one more book I did read about, and this is a bit outside. It doesn't really fit Historathon, but it is American history. But I read this as a special case. This is a book club run by Jeff. And the channel is called Jeff Loves History, I believe. I'll link to it. He has a book club called the Slow Burn Through History Book Club, where he takes big books of history and reads them slowly. So for the past 3, almost 4 months, we've been reading this book, James McPherson's Battle Cry for Freedom. I was participating. There's a Discord group. You should really check out Jeff's channel. You can get, if you want to participate. We're going to be reading The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson, I believe, for the next book. And it's going to take another 3 months. We're going to read it slowly. But this is about the Civil War, and I encourage to read this. I've tried to get into the American Civil War as a non-American before. I read the Grant biography by Ron Chernow, and I was completely lost because it throws you in the middle of the Cold War, not the Cold War, the Civil War. This is the history book to read if you want to get into because it gives you the background and it gives you it's a complex. You've got two Americas. You've got Northern Democrats and Southern Republicans or Southern Whigs, and it's just the Civil War, and it goes on and on. The killing, it goes on, battle after battle after battle after defeat, retreat, but just good solid history for anybody again new to Civil War. This is a good place to start. Good place to start. So again, check out Jeff's channel. I'll link it. Below. There is one last reading event that I did, and this one also I combined actually two events. This is also a personal reading project that I've been doing. I just decided to do it, or I was pushed to do it by my wonderful commenters. They encouraged me to get started on Russian lit. I haven't really read Russian fiction, Russian literature, and I just jumped in. So I've read Russian fairy tales. I read The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. I read The Death of Ivan Ilyich, Leo Tolstoy's very slim novella about a slim novella. I was supposed to in April read this. War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Unfortunately, this brick, I just couldn't start it because, as I mentioned, the beginning of this extremely long video that, if you remember way back in the beginning, there was a war here and I just couldn't do it. So I've put that one on pause. I might do it in the summer, War and Peace. Whether there is war or peace, I'll do it. And, assuming I'm alive and there's no nuclear holocaust, although I, all bets are off. But what I did read, and again, it matched perfectly with another book club. This book club is run by Vince, and Vince's channel is called Traumatic Tomes, and his book club is called the Traumatic Book Club, where he and his book club members, and I guess I'm one of them informally, read traumatic books, just traumatic books. And we read one book every other month. So it was with it in April or March, we read All Quiet on the Western Front, a very traumatic book. For April, we read this. Sorry about the glare. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn's One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, a small novella fictionalizing life in the Gulag, in the Russian Gulag in the 1940s and 50s. Of course, this book is translated by H.T. Willits, and this is the authorized English translation. I don't know if you can see that, but it's also the winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, which, well, first of all, Vince said that he had read another version, but it seems like this is the only authorized English translation of the book. And yeah, it's the story. It's one day of the life of Ivan Denisovich, who is a inmate in a Russian gulag. It starts at when he wakes up in the morning, and he takes you out throughout his whole day until he has dinner and goes to sleep. But of course, in between, it's just drudgery and very, very, very difficult life. Maybe you can see the photo there. These gulags were in like middle of nowhere, Siberia. This is held in the deep, deep Siberian winter. The setting of this particular day must have been a January or something. Now, again, it won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, I'm I'm skeptical again. Nobel Prize is given by, it's a Western prize. It was given, I believe, at the height of the Cold War. So there was a lot of propaganda element. Does this book really deserve? Does it really deserve the Nobel Prize for Literature? I don't know. I can't be the judge. If you want to read it, it's a slim book, under 200 pages, novella really. But Solzhenitsyn, you can tell he went through the Gulag system, he lived it, and he pretty much wrote about it. And he wrote about it. I'm not saying it's a bad book, but it's just that whole propaganda that, Soviet Union bad, look how evil they are. Let's give any dissident the Nobel Peace Prize. Not considering the fact that Solzhenitsyn was allowed to write this book and to publish this book in the 1960s when Khrushchev took over after the death of Stalin, and he was trying to thaw and trying to reform the Soviet Union. They sort of thawed, and there was a little bit of some freedom that allowed a Solzhenitsyn to actually write this book and to publish it. And he published it in Russia, and it was, it sort of exposed not the issues with communism per se, but the issues with Stalinism. That was the problem. But again, maybe I've been a bit too controversial for the book itself. It's really a prison. Like, what's life in prison? But this is, it's a very much a working camp prison, and the guards and the convicts. It's a world unto itself, and the people who work there and the convicts themselves, they're really just one gang, one kind of like ecosystem, and it's just you have to be. It's a sort of you're on survival mode, and you've got to learn how to operate the politics of a prison, really, where you see the same people every day, and there's drudgery, and there's I won't say torture, but it's just a terrible life, terrible food, but that's still the highlight of the day. Um, um, Working in freezing conditions, no contact with any kind of family. You're in the middle of Siberia. Of course, this is the pre-internet, the pre-TV, the pre-telephone age. Just a traumatic existence. This is my Kindle edition. I got this on the Kindle. I couldn't find it used. I could have bought it a like a paperback hard copy, but I decided just to plunge for the um, Kindle edition. But yeah, so that covered my Russian lit, another book of Russian literature that I read, and it was the book selection for Vince's traumatic book club. Please do check out Vince's channel. I'll link to it. I'll link to his video discussing his thoughts and reactions to this book. His is much better than mine, so you should definitely check it out. I'll link it below. But yeah, did I forget anything? No, Queen Noor and Frank, America, Solzhenitsyn, the Crusades. My May and June is going to be a little bit broken up, but I'll explain that in another video. For now, I'm going to wrap this up. Do check out the Substack. Do check out the other channels that I mentioned below. If you want to email me, please do let me know. Until then, Booktube, or other than that, Booktube, salute.